Ever get this feeling like South Asia in the news is just stuck in a rut, you know? Cricket, conflicts, and that's about it.
Yeah, it's like people just skim the surface.
Yeah, and we're trying to dive deeper, right? That's what this whole deep dive is about. So we're digging into those articles you shared, trying to uncover those underreported stories.
Absolutely. And I think to really understand what's going on, we need to start with the players on the field, so to speak.
And there are a lot of them.
We're talking 7 nations: Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, the Maldives, Nepal, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka.
Quite the lineup,
Yeah.
each with their own unique story. And this idea of democracy, well, it plays out so differently in each one.
Right. And it shows you it's not just a Western concept like some people try to argue.
Totally. Like you read about democracy being this fragile thing in South Asia, constantly under threat.
Which isn't entirely inaccurate. There are real challenges.
Oh, for sure. But then you come across research like this study we found, and it's like, whoa, hold on a second. People from all walks of life in these countries, even those with very little, overwhelmingly support democratic ideals.
It's pretty remarkable when you think about it.
It really is. And it kind of reminds me of, those India-Pakistan cricket matches. The rivalry is so intense, everyone's on edge. But then out of nowhere, you get these moments of pure sportsmanship.
I see what you mean, yeah.
And that's what reading about South Asia feels like. This constant tension between hope and despair, rivalry, and this shared destiny. It's fascinating.
And nowhere is that tension more evident than in the relationship between India and Pakistan itself.
It's the elephant in the room, right?
Exactly. On the one hand, you have this long shadow of the Kashmir conflict, this territorial dispute that's fueled decades of mistrust and military buildup.
It's a heavy weight on the region.
Absolutely. But then, and this is what I find so interesting, you have something like the Indus Waters Treaty.
Okay, tell me more about that.
Well, picture this. In the middle of all that tension, these two rivals managed to hammer out an agreement to share the resources of the Indus River system.
Wow. So there is hope for diplomacy, even in the toughest situations.
It's a testament to the possibility of finding common ground, even when things seem their bleakest.
It makes you wonder, though, why has democracy struggled to take root in a place where so many people clearly want it? Like, take Pakistan, for example.
Okay, so Pakistan.
You have this incredibly vibrant press, these courageous human rights activists.
Yeah, it's a pretty amazing civil society when you think about it.
But it seems like every time democracy starts to gain a foothold, something pulls it back.
Right, there's this back and forth.
What is it about Pakistan that makes it so hard for democracy to flourish?
It's complicated, but you can't ignore the legacy of military intervention in Pakistani politics. It's a powerful force, and when you factor in the constant tension with India, it's created a situation where the military has remained a dominant force.
So it's not just about coups and military takeovers.
Exactly. It's also the lack of consistent international support for democratic forces within Pakistan. It's like the world's watching this tug of war between the civilian government and the military, but few are willing to step in and lend a hand to those fighting for democratic reforms.
Wow, it's really eye-opening when you look at it that way. Now, Bangladesh, on the other hand, that's a country that's really overcome some incredible hurdles in its journey towards democracy.
Oh, absolutely. You wouldn't believe what Bangladesh has gone through to build a democracy.
They had to fight for their very existence, right?
First, they had to fight for their independence. Then they endured periods of military rule and even the assassination of Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, who was like a symbol of their liberation.
It's hard to imagine a nation coming back from something so traumatic.
And yet, Bangladesh did. Despite those setbacks, Bangladesh has witnessed this really inspiring resurgence of multi-party democracy in recent decades.
That's amazing.
It really speaks to the resilience of the Bangladeshi people and their belief in self-determination.
It's a testament to the power of hope. And then you have Nepal talk about a roller coaster ride. They go from a constitutional monarchy to a Maoist insurgency.
Yeah, Nepal's had quite the journey.
And then, incredibly, this largely peaceful pro-democracy movement rises up. It's actually quite emotional when you see that photo of activist Durga Thaipa celebrating democracy in 1990 and then again in 2006.
It really captures the spirit of hope and resilience, doesn't it?
Absolutely. But Nepal's story also highlights the immense challenges of balancing competing interests. You have the Maoists who are pushing for these radical social and economic reforms.
Which can create a lot of uncertainty and even fear for some.
For sure. And then you also have this undercurrent of suspicion towards India's role in Nepal's future, which adds another layer of complexity.
It's a delicate balancing act, to say the least.
It's like they're walking this tightrope between revolution and stability, all while trying to manage their relationship with this giant neighbor next door. And speaking of tricky relationships, Sri Lanka has a fascinating story, too. I mean, on paper, this nation seems to have it all. Impressive economic growth, high levels of human development.
Right, they've really cultivated this image of a tropical paradise.
Exactly. But beneath that idyllic surface, there's this brutal ethnic conflict that's been simmering for decades. It reminds us that even nations with seemingly strong foundations can be deeply affected by internal divisions.
Absolutely, it's a good reminder that progress isn't always linear.
So what's the story there? What's at the heart of this conflict?
Let's see, at its core, it's about the relationship between the Sinhalese majority and the Tamil minority, including those with roots in India.
Right, and there's a sizable Tamil population in India as well, isn't there?
Exactly. And that's part of what makes this so complex. There's a long history of discrimination and violence directed at the Tamil population in Sri Lanka, which eventually erupted into a full-blown civil war.
Wow. I didn't realize it had gotten to that point.
And because of its own large Tamil population, India couldn't just stay neutral. They got involved, which only inflamed tensions further.
It's like a lose-lose situation for everyone involved.
In many ways, it was. And while the conflict has officially ended, those scars run deep, and Sri Lanka is still trying to figure out what a true and lasting peace might look like.
It makes you think about the role India plays in all of this. It's like you can't talk about South Asia without addressing the elephant in the room, right?
Exactly. India's sheer size and influence cast a long shadow over the regions, both literally and figuratively. And for its neighbors, it's a source of both opportunity and anxiety.
I can see how that would be the case.
Often, it's both at the same time.
So how does that dynamic actually play out? Can you give us some examples?
Sure. Take Bangladesh, for instance.
Okay.
Share a border, they share a history, but there's also this tension over water rights, especially when it comes to the Ganges River. But on the other hand, they also collaborate on things like disaster management, and they have these growing economic ties.
So it's kind of a love-hate relationship?
In many ways, yes. And it's a similar story with Nepal. They have this unique open border, which allows citizens to live and work in either country, which speaks to this deep cultural connection they share. But at the same time, there are concerns about trade imbalances and this perception that India sometimes throws its weight around a bit too much.
Yeah, I can see how that would create some friction. It sounds like just managing those relationships is a full-time job. But what about regional cooperation on a larger scale? Is that even possible with so much baggage? I mean, you hear about SARC, the South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation.
Right, so...
But it never seems to gain much traction.
You're right, it's been slow going. SARC was created with this hopeful vision of greater economic and political cooperation, but the relationship between India and Pakistan tends to overshadow everything else.
It's like trying to have a family dinner when two of the siblings are refusing to be in the same room.
A very apt analogy. But it's not just India and Pakistan. There are also concerns about India's economic dominance within SARC.
Oh, interesting. How does that play out?
Well, take SAFTA, the South Asian Free Trade Agreement. On paper, it has the potential to boost trade and lift millions of people out of poverty.
It's a win-win, right?
Exactly, in theory. But some of the smaller nations are worried. They fear that India's massive economy will benefit disproportionately, leaving them vulnerable.
So instead of seeing it as an opportunity, it's seen as a threat.
Exactly. And that's created this climate of distrust, which makes it really difficult to unlock the full potential of regional cooperation.
It's a tough situation for sure. Wanting to work together, but also afraid of getting the short end of the stick.
It's a classic dilemma. How do you balance those potential benefits of regional cooperation with the anxieties of individual nations, especially with such a power imbalance? And what I always come back to is that these aren't just abstract geopolitical issues, right? These have real-world consequences for everyday people.
Absolutely. And that's what I really appreciated about the articles you shared. It wasn't just about treaties and summits. It was about the human side of it all.
Yeah, like those stories about climate change.
Exactly. I mean, climate change is already wreaking havoc in the region. You've got farmers in Bangladesh losing their land to rising sea levels. And then in the Maldives, you have entire communities facing displacement. It's just heartbreaking.
And it makes you realize how urgent it is to find ways to work together. Because these are cross-border challenges. They require cross-border solutions.
Okay.
I mean, climate change, it doesn't recognize national boundaries. So our response shouldn't either, right?
It makes sense. And it really highlights how interconnected everything is in South Asia. Like, you can't separate the environmental challenges from the social and political ones. They all feed
Absolutely.
into each other.
It's like this complex web. Everything affects everything else.
Totally. It's like everything's amplified in South Asia, the
Wait.
good, the bad, and the downright terrifying. Speaking of terrifying, what about terrorism? That word always seems to come up when you talk about this part of the world.
Yeah, you can't ignore it. The legacy of terrorism and religious extremism is a heavy one in South Asia. You have groups like Lashkar-e-Taiba operating mainly in Pakistan, responsible for so many attacks, including that horrific one in Mumbai back in 2008.
Right, and then there's the Taliban. And while they're based in Afghanistan, their influence has definitely spilled over into the region.
Especially in Pakistan, yeah. It's a complicated relationship, to say the least.
For sure. And it's not just about those external threats, is it? There's also this rise of religious intolerance and violence within some of these countries, often targeting minority groups.
Sadly, you're right. We've seen a rise in violence and discrimination against religious minorities in several South Asian countries. And this rise in sectarianism, it's really troubling because it threatens the very fabric of these societies. They're so diverse, and when that diversity is under attack, it undermines the whole idea of a peaceful and inclusive society.
It makes you wonder, can democracy really thrive in an environment where people are afraid to express their beliefs or even just exist peacefully?
It's the million-dollar question. Because democracy, it's not just about elections and institutions. It requires a culture of tolerance, a respect for human rights, and those are things that need to be constantly nurtured and defended. And that's where I think the role of individuals in civil society comes in.
It's about people taking action.
Absolutely.
Because it's not all doom and gloom, right? We see those glimmers of hope, those stories of resilience emerging from the region. Like, I was so inspired reading about the work being done by organizations promoting education for girls in Afghanistan. Even in the face of danger and resistance, they persevere.
Exactly. It's incredible, isn't it? And we can't forget about the vibrant arts and culture scene across South Asia. I mean, from the colorful world of Bollywood films to the rich musical traditions, these are all powerful expressions of creativity and identity.
They remind us of the beauty that exists even in the midst of struggle.
Precisely. And that's why I believe there's still hope for the region.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into South Asia, I have to ask, what does the future hold? Is it destined to be trapped in this cycle of conflict? Or is there a path toward a brighter future?
If I had a crystal ball, I'd tell you. But I think the future of South Asia will be determined by the choices its people make today.
So we're not just bystanders, right? We have a say in how things unfold.
I truly believe that, yeah. And that's why it's so crucial to engage with South Asia on a human level, to move past those stereotypes and simplistic narratives,
Like those headlines that only focus on conflict and poverty.
Exactly.
But then you dig a little deeper and you find these incredible stories of innovation and entrepreneurship that paint a completely different picture. Like, I had no idea India's tech sector was booming the way it is.
It's pretty remarkable. Startups everywhere, even in smaller cities. It's amazing.
And like this whole other side to the story is unfolding right in front of us.
It is. And it's easy to miss if you're not paying attention.
It really is. So what you're saying is we need to look beyond the surface, right? To really understand what's going on.
100%.
Yeah.
Because those complexities, they hold incredible stories of resilience, creativity, and hope.
And those stories deserve to be told.
Absolutely.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into South Asia, what's the one thing you really want our listeners to take away from all of this? If they only remember one thing.
That South Asia is not a monolith.
Yeah.
It's not one thing. It's a region of incredible diversity with so many cultures and languages and religions all intertwined. And sure, it faces big challenges, but it also holds immense potential. And the future, well, it's not set in stone. It's being written right now by everyone.
I love that. The future is a work in progress, and we all have a role to play in shaping it. So for our listeners who are feeling inspired to learn more, where should they go? What should they explore?
Well, there are some incredible organizations doing really important work in the region, like the Citizens Foundation. They're providing education to underprivileged children in Pakistan, which is just so essential.
Education is the foundation for everything.
It really is. And then there's BRAC, which is doing amazing work empowering women and fighting poverty in Bangladesh.
Fantastic. I'll make sure to link to those in the show notes.
Perfect. And honestly, sometimes the most powerful thing you could do is simply connect with people from the region, hear their stories firsthand, challenge your own assumptions. You might be surprised at what you learn.
I'm already planning my next trip. This deep dive has definitely sparked my curiosity. So, to our listener, thank you for joining us on this journey through the heart of South Asia. We hope we've given you a deeper understanding of the region's complexities, its challenges, and its enduring hope.
It's been a pleasure diving into this with you.
Likewise, and to our listeners, remember, the journey doesn't end here. Keep asking questions, keep an open mind, keep diving deep.